Okay, folks, we're going to get started. We're racing around here like a herd of turtles, and we're about 30 minutes late. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming out to the Vermilion River Festival and Parade, and we're going to have a full day today of fun on the river and on the banks of the river. And so typically what we do on this day and have been doing is have a lot of fun with boats. And that's what our first program is this morning. My name, by the way, is Brassieur. I teach at the university in anthropology, and I have the honor to work with a project called In the Mind of the Maker. And it's one that we have a filmmaker here, Dr. Charles Richard, and we have some film producer, Mr. Durrell, over here. We have boat builders. We have people who help and facilitate the project, and we're going to meet them and talk a little bit about it. To begin with, I'd like to run a few slides just to provide a little context for our project, and so we can see how it developed. And it took some years in the development, and it's going. It included the building of a boat, and you see it right here on display. And it includes as you'll see, the examination of what that means to build a boat, you know. And so let's go ahead and get started, and we will answer questions as it goes along, as they come out. Is there a way to turn the lights down now? Okay, so this is a particular type of boat. We'll learn a little bit about it today, and as we go on during the day, if you want to learn more, we have people here who can help us learn about it. Let's go ahead on. Okay, so when we think about boats, I know I have thought about this topic for a long time, you know, some 30 or 40 years. I've been interested in it myself. And what's interesting about a boat, well, it could be the parts of the boat. You can't see them too well, but I have a little diagram of all the little parts. If you were really interested in boats, you would learn all about those little parts, you know, and components and what they're called, and there's a whole terminology for all of that, which I find interesting. Or you might be interested in the type of the boat or its propulsion. See, here's on the picture, the Flying Dutchman was a schooner, a fishing boat, and of course a sailboat. And the type of the boat is interesting too, at least to some people, you know, to understand what kind of boat it is. Okay. Or you might be interested in historical development, and a pirogue is one of the common vessels we have down here. You know, a very simple boat, but it went through historic changes. And so originally it was made of one single log and dug out. Then the planks came along, and they were more handy and available. And so plank pirogues were made. Then plywood pirogues were made. Then after that, fiberglass pirogues were made. And so there's this historical development, and that's one way to approach the subject that you could look at, see how it changed over time. Okay. Or you could try to look at the design of a boat, and I think sometimes these line drawings, I see art in them, because what the artist or the draftsman is trying to do is represent 3 dimensions on just 2 dimensions. And they do a very good job of it, and it's wonderful to see a great set of lines like that. But as we learn about boat building in Louisiana, especially South Louisiana, the boat builders just didn't have those line drawings. That's not how they built boats. They didn't start out with a drawing or maybe even a model. They just come out of their mind and build a boat. But anyway, so we could study design like this if we wanted to. Or we could look at the methods and techniques of boat building, and to me that's fun. How exactly is it done? How do you start? What are the steps in the process? What kind of tools does it take to make it? What sort of skill does it take to do that? And all of that is part of boat building as well. So we could look at it from that point of view. Or we could think about beauty and art, and the aesthetic side of things. And I believe that's what attracts a lot of people to boats. It's a beautiful thing, the form of it, the curves, the way the wood is shaped and how it's finished and all of that kind of thing. And I believe the boat builders are drawn to that kind of aspect as well. Okay, so what this project does is look at all of those kinds of things. That's what we wanted to do to begin with, and that's part of our motivation. But as we learned more and more about it, what became most interesting was something that was inside the mind of the boat builder. How did they handle the traditional knowledge that they have in their mind and turn it into form, turn it into something of beauty and function? And that became our quest. So how does that knowledge learned? How's it passed on? That has to do with culture. So, there's two kind of aspects here. One of them is psychological, you might think, because it's in the psyche of a builder. It's in the mind of a builder individually. And yet, they're shaped in some way by their culture. So they received information, from the earlier generations, and they pass it on, and that kind of thing is also interesting to us. Okay. So we chose this particular form. It could be called a Creole push skiff for a number of reasons. It's a reasonably small vessel. You might think of it as a simple skiff, but it's not that simple. It's got some complex curves. It has some particular peculiarities. For example, it has this jouk that's on top of the boat, and that keep the oar lifted way up off of the gunnel right here. And the purpose of that is so that it can be rowed standing up, and you push the oar forward. And that's pretty unique to Louisiana, and so it's a very special boat, that we chose to have that. This one here was built by a master builder, Raymond Sedetall, who lived on the edge of the Atchafalaya Swamp in Pierre Part, on the eastern edge of the swamp. And this particular boat also has some history. So there was an artist, A.R. Woad, who came around the time of the Civil War, and at different times he came into Louisiana documenting all kinds of things as an artist. And look at what he did in 1869. And this is that boat. It has a kind of a triangular transom or back, that triangle piece in the back that you see. It has the jouk. It has other features that you could see on a boat like this in 1869. And of course, those boats were around long before that. And then in 1969, Malcolm Como took this picture not too far from Pierre Part on Grand Bayou, and here's a lady operating that, and that's how people lived, so it was very important to the people of that area who traveled a lot by boat. They lived along the bayou. They went up and down and across the bayou in boats like this, at least until this picture was taken, although it became quite rare thereafter to have a boat like that. And of course, the motorized boats displaced the old rowboats. Okay. In 1984, Raymond Sedetall revived this craft, and there was a boat built at the World's Fair that year that showed not only his skill but the tradition of this particular boat in his area. And Raymond was just a tremendous craft person, and he didn't have any lines. He didn't have any line drawings or models for this boat, but it had been in his community, and he was such a great builder that he's come out with it. Okay? And there you see it has really wonderful lines, and how in the world could someone replicate or even come up with lines like that, out of their mind? And that becomes one of the encouragements to have a project like this. There you see, as Raymond became older and eventually continued to build boats, he became a sculptor. He carved duck decoys, and he was a champion decoy carver, so he was a skilled person throughout his lifetime. And this is the kind of vessel. He built some boats like this for Vermilionville, and if you go in the back, we have an area that has boats there on display that were built by Raymond Sedetall. And here's one of them there. There's another, that's one that was here. Now, we became interested in these boats, and Farron Surratt and I, there's Farron right back here, who works for Vermilionville. He and I took a course years and years ago now from Dave Dillon. And that's him in that, stooped over trying to measure that boat right there. At any rate, we started measuring these boats to try to document them, realizing that they were not very well documented at all, had never been documented. And so we tried to produce some line drawings. I learned an awful lot. Number one, I'm not a draftsman. I learned that very quickly. But at any rate, we worked on it. Now, here's another way, and this is the more traditional way of learning about a vessel. Keith Felder, who may be here today, I didn't see him, he's here, is one of the few people who build boats like this. And he can build a boat like this because he went to apprentice with Raymond Sedetall in Pierre Part to learn that. And that's the more typical way of learning, just by observation and replicating what you see and building like that. Here's a boat built by Ora Mendoza, who is one of the top boat builders we have around today, lives in Bayou. And we came up with a project to document this kind of boat. We were going to use some fancy tools, and we went through this kind of process. Let me show you how it goes. We took this total station, and this was done, by the way, on a day of the River Festival in 2008, I think it was. And this is David Palmer working the survey instrument, and what it does is take some very, very accurate points, laser points on that boat, and records them in that machine. And we did that in addition to another program called Photo Modeler, which is a photographic tool that eventually computerizes. Let me show you how it works. Now, the figure on the right-hand bottom corner has some little red dots, and these are places where photographs were taken. So you take photographs from different angles like that, and the photographs themselves are fed into, they're digital photos, they're fed into a computer program, and it looks like this in the computer. You have different photo shots that are put together, and the advantage of doing this is that you can let the computer make a model of the boat, which is a three-dimensional model that can be rotated and looked at and that kind of thing. So anyway, we were very interested in this boat, trying to visualize it and come up with some line drawings that it's not very distinct. But at any rate, that just give you an idea of what we've been interested in as we went ahead. Now, to me, far more interesting kind of project is a boat building project. And the Cavalier family from Franklin, around the same year, 2008, I think it was, built one of these push skiffs. And it turned out to be a beautiful, beautiful vessel. It was patterned after one of the push skiffs that had been built years ago and had rotted. You know, it was found to be in poor shape, but they used it to take some measurements off of it to recreate that boat. And there you see a vessel that was built, and there it's on display in 2009 at this festival right here. And so a beautiful thing that they did. There you see one shot of it. Okay. And there's Farron, and you see some of the models, and Jim Delahousie, and we're going to see Mr. Ancelet here later on. Now, so that pushes us forward into this project called In the Mind of the Maker, and during this project, another boat was built, and Larry and his brothers, Kevin and Justin, and also their dad, Ed, who's the leader of that group, built this boat, and it was documented during its building, and some interesting photography and videography was done, as well as some interviews at that time, and all of that is coming together into the production of a film. The film is called In the Mind of the Maker, and at this point, I will turn over to Dr. Richard, Charles Richard, to talk a little bit about that film and then tell us about it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brassieur. This has been a project that we've been working on for many, many years. I don't remember how long ago it was exactly that Ray came and visited me at the Light Center where I have an office, and talked with some of the folks over there and said, what would it take for us to create some computer models of these boats so that they can be preserved? Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. So that was really where the project got started. In 2000 or so, I had been asked, this is before I became a university professor, I had been asked to write an article for Southern Living magazine about Louisiana's unique boat building culture. And of course, naturally, I started with some of the same sources that Ray mentioned a moment ago, and worked with some of the people who had apprenticed under Raymond Sett et al. And so forth. And that's where I became interested in about the year 2000, when one of Mr. Raymond Sett et al.'s apprentices told me, he says, I asked him about the documents, where can you find plans and so forth. And I'll tell you what he told me. He says, the apprentice, his name was Ken, he said to me, he said, I'll tell you the same thing that when I asked Mr. Raymond and the others about where we can find some plans. They said, man, how come you want to look at a picture of a boat? Let's go build one, you know? And that's the thing that really caught my attention, is that these are builders who work from a concept in their mind's eye. And as it turns out, this is a topic that's of great, great interest to scientists of all kinds, people who work in computer science, yes, where they're trying to build computers that can sort of mimic brain function and help us to visualize in the way that Ray was just showing us. But also, more broadly speaking, how do creative people in general create the things that they do? Whether we're talking about fine artists or architects or engineers or people of any kind who make things, start with a similar process. They start with an image in their mind's eye. Even musicians will start maybe not with a visual image in the mind's eye, but they start with a sound in the mind's ear, if you want to think of it that way. And so we found in the process of these boat building some of the very seeds of creativity. And that became the thing we wanted to explore. So yes, we're telling the story from start to finish of how the Cavelier family built one of these very, very beautiful and unique craft. And we use that story as a way of talking about broader questions of how do creative people in general make the things that they make. So the film itself is an interesting blend of kind of a traditional Louisiana culture documentary, but it also has a lot to do with neuroscience and computer science, and kind of blends the old-fashioned homespun craft that you find here in South Louisiana with the high-tech interests of the sciences. And all of it, we hope, is a way of speaking to the broader questions of how do makers make the things that they do. So I'd like to maybe just share with you a couple of clips. The first one is the trailer. We're going to go ahead and play that one first, if we can get the lights down just a little bit, and then we'll show the other one that's called Show Reel. All right, that'll work. That's the show reel. We'll go ahead and run that one first if you want to go ahead and play that one. Get the volume up. Thank you.
Il va hisser ses voiles, grand Dieu, quel triste sort. Priez dans Dieu la belle, qu'on arrive à bon port. Il va hisser ses voiles, grand Dieu, quel triste sort. Priez dans Dieu la belle, qu'on arrive à bon port. Qu'on nous irons la base sur ces îles éloignées. Il y aura des jolies filles qui te charmera le cœur. Quand nous irons la base sur ces îles éloignées, il y aura des jolies filles qui te charmera le cœur. Et moi la malheureuse, je serai la délaissée. L'amour est bien trompeuse quand nous sommes tués. Et moi la malheureuse, je serai la délaissée. L'amour est bien trompeuse quand nous sommes tués. Tiens-moi fidèle et sage, et conserve-moi mon cœur. Je viendrai de ce voyage, je ferai la vraie bonheur. Tiens-toi fidèle et sage, et conserve-moi ton cœur. Je viendrai de ce voyage, je ferai la vraie bonheur.
But when you building a boat, it never leaves your mind. You're always looking at it. You're always thinking about it. You're always picturing it in your head, you know, what you want to accomplish. At the end, it all comes together.
You just picture it in your mind how it's going to look, and that's the way you build it, the way it's in your mind. A lot of people build everything with a pattern. You know, that's easy to build with a pattern, but you build it in your mind, your brain, your computer, and that's what you use. I was born in 1928. That makes me 84 years old. There's nobody built a boat alike. Every boat you see is different.
When we were kids, you could always tell who was coming down the river, even though you don't recognize them, by the shape of the boat and the way it's riding on the water and the sound.
I call a good boat is a pretty boat, something that's nice to look at. You know, you look at a woman, you want to see a good-looking woman, you know.
And every time somebody passes, they got to put their hand on it and touch it. The wood's alive.
When you build a skiff, you have to build on it a little while, and then you have to stop and look at it and just think about it a little while. Something strange about building a skiff. It's almost like you have to put your soul into that boat when you build it.
Thank you. The one that you just saw, the second one, were just test shots that we did, as you can see, in November, about 2 years ago, just to see if we really had the makings of a good story. And in talking with the Cavelier family, we found that we did. And so you heard some of the interviews that helped us to realize that. And the other stuff was just test footage. The first clip that you saw, though, is from the actual film itself, and just gives you a little bit of a flavor of what you'll see and so forth. I'll just go ahead and mention this. People always ask about the music. That's the first song that you heard. They're both by Christy Guillory and Danny DeVilliers. Christy they're composing music for the film, original music, and the piece that you heard was actually came from the recordings that were made by Alan Lomax in 1934, and it's an old boat building song. And my French is not good enough to give you a good translation, but it was selected for that purpose. And so Christy did a reinterpretation of that song just because it was the subject matter matched so well to the construction of a boat. But just to simply wrap it up and then take questions, the film is essentially looking at how we as a culture maintain certain forms of knowledge, right? Ray was talking about this a moment ago, is how do we pass along a knowledge that's not written down, that's not recorded as lines on paper necessarily. How do you take an image that is in one person's mind and pass it down? This is a form of knowledge that we don't want to lose. Okay? When we talk about preserving culture and heritage, a lot of times people focus on preserving the material culture, and that's one of the things that Vermilionville does so very well, is to preserve the material culture. We also wanted in this film to look at how to preserve the mental culture as well. All right? The thought processes that allow these very, very creative folks to do the things that they do so that they're not lost. And that kind of creativity kind of extends into lots of different areas. So I want to go ahead and just acknowledge a few people in particular. As Ray mentioned, there are a number of people here who are a critical part of this project. I'll come to the boat builders last. First, we have Jim Delahousie, who is in the back here. Many of you know Jim Delahousie for the work that he's done in studying the culture of the Atchafalaya Basin over the many, many years that he's been working there and working to preserve that kind of knowledge of the folks who've made their home there for so long. We have some of the artists who worked on the project. Dylan Meinhardt here. Dylan is our storyboard and visual effects artist, and the reason that matters so much to us is that we, in this movie, are trying to do something a little bit different, a little bit, well, not just a little bit, but rather challenging, which is to try and illustrate on film what's happening inside the mind of a maker as he or she walks through the creative process. And so we are using the research done for us by neuroscientists, and through visual effects like you see in big Hollywood movies, we're trying to use computer-generated imagery to illustrate how it is that Mr. Edward conceives of these boats. As he says in the clips there, he thinks of them in his mind, and the same way then with his sons, who are boat builders in their own right behind him. The two boat builders that we have here today are Larry and Justin Cavilier. If y'all want to stand up just for a moment and take some credit for this beautiful work. They have been learning from Mr. Edward for many years and have become, as I said, really great master boat builders in their own right. Also up here are a number of models that the two of them have made that you all can take a look at. I'm not sure, I know we were pressed for time, so let me see. Okay. We'll take questions in just a moment. Before we do that, I just want to make one little announcement. The project that we're doing, along with making the film, it's become a much bigger undertaking than just the film alone. Our principal nonprofit partner on this project is the Boy Scouts of America's Swamp Base. Some of you probably have read about this. It's a large high adventure facility that's being built in the Atchafalaya Basin, not far from Catahoula. And when it's completed, it will be a very, very important component, we believe, in helping to preserve and expand the people's knowledge of Atchafalaya Basin culture in all sorts of ways. They'll be teaching the boys a lot of the things about the history and sort of heritage of the Atchafalaya Basin. So one of the things that we're doing is we're donating to the Boy Scouts for the Swamp Base facility not only the use of this film and the theater that they will have there at Swamp Base, but we're also working with some curriculum designers and others to create educational materials so that Boy Scouts from all over the country, when they come to Swamp Base, they have the opportunity to learn a little bit about the maritime heritage that's associated with this region. And that includes, we hope in the end, some boat building courses so that they can learn from master boat builders, people who have experience. I'm looking at Farron right now, for instance, who's our Vermilionville sort of resident master boat builder here and craftsman, as well as others who can kind of help pass on that heritage to young people. So for those who are interested, we have a representative, my son Simon, he's with the Boy Scouts, and after we take questions, he'll be available to, if anybody would like to contribute to that effort, and we have a place where you can sign up your email address if you're interested in learning more about it. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions for us or for the two boat builders who are here today, or for Dr. Ray? Anybody? Yes.
Do your wives or significant others have opinions about what the boat will look like?
Okay, so, all right, that's a good question. In fact, I don't think...
What it is, we put it in our own minds, you know, we build it if they like it, you know, good. What we like.
We try to keep them in the dark, and we don't want to let them know how much it costs.
I'll tell you, though, one of the nice things about working on the project was listening to their dad, Mr. Edward, tell stories about his wife, their mother, who was apparently, by all accounts, a better fisherman than Mr. Edward. That's what I've been told. Now, Mr. Edwards still makes his living catching catfish in the basin, and that's what you saw at the beginning of that clip. And he was doing that in a wooden bateau with his son Kevin, a boat that he had made. But it was kind of fun to listen to them tell stories. I never had the pleasure of meeting your mother, but as I understand it, she was every bit, if not more, the hard worker that their dad is, and by some accounts, a much more effective and faster fisher person. So, other questions? Anybody else?
Okay. We have a hardware store in Lafayette, Ducey Hardware, and we were fixing to close it and decided, I think with the grace of God, that we were trying to encourage the Acadian heritage. So we're having a 40th anniversary next Saturday and wondered, would your models be available to show on display next Saturday? Because we're trying, that's the beginning, and what we want to do from there is maybe every other Saturday have a little Cajun storytelling and things to keep that heritage up, because our generation didn't think to ask our parents all those things, and I feel like we're losing it. So whatever you can do to give us advice or assist, we'd appreciate it. Yeah.
You can use that one and whatever else Charles has.
I'd be happy to talk with you afterwards. It sounds like it's a wonderful...
And a copy of this, because we have a TV and we're going to be showing, like we have Christie's CD and a lot of local stuff, so I'd love to... It's on Johnston Street, Ducey Heritage Hardware. It's been there 40 years, yeah. Across from Office Depot on Johnston. So,
Well, thank you very much, actually, for doing that. I would like to talk with you afterwards about that, because that is how heritage gets preserved, and I'm really, really happy to hear that you're interested in doing that. One word about the models. Ray alluded to this earlier. Traditionally, ships have been built, even very, very complex ships, throughout history without the use of blueprints and plans. The idea of line drawings and so forth is a relatively modern phenomena that really you only find, I guess, probably in the 17th century or so is when you started seeing people using plans. Before that, the way shipbuilders built their boats was from the creation of models, scale models, and then they would just simply loft the lines from those models to build bigger boats and so forth. So what you have up here are a number of models that were all built by members of the Cavelier family. Some of them actually we have available as sort of a premium or reward that we're offering to people who contribute to this effort with the Boy Scouts, who make a sizable contribution to covering the costs of creating the lesson plans and the other materials that we're giving to Swamp Base for this. So we can talk with you about that if you're interested in certain of the models that are available for that purpose, as well as some of the other items that are up here. Does anybody else have any other questions? The film will be out, we anticipate, around this time next year, in the fall of next year, depending on funding. This has been a labor of love for everybody involved in it, and it's just an opportunity for me to say thank you to everybody who has worked on it and contributed very, very generously to this, their time and their expertise and their labor. Making films is an expensive proposition, but it's also the sort of thing that helps, as you just said a moment ago, to kind of make people aware and ask and preserve the kinds of questions and answers that a lot of times we forget to ask our parents and grandparents and so forth.